Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologues. In case you haven't heard, I'm told there's an election coming up pretty soon. In some areas, there's a lot of violence and civil unrest. If you're in the market for personal protection for yourself or your family, I'd encourage you to visit Guns Etc. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet and they have product. And they're getting new product all the time. They'll work with you to get the exact type of protection that fits your needs. Stop by their store in Mesa or visit gunsetcetera.com where you'll have access to over $400 million worth of firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriot's YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy September 16th, 2020. If you wanted to know something or even something more about the federal officer shot outside the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Courthouse in downtown Phoenix yesterday, you would not have been informed by the AZ Central website, the website for the Arizona Republic. Not this morning. I screen grabbed what you would have found if you visited the site as of 8:52 this morning. I just double-checked before we went live. The same amount of emptiness. Nothing about the story. The main featured story this morning, will schools have to close again? Then, what they call top headlines. What the pandemic has and hasn't changed for AZ voters. How to safely vote in 2020, explained by Katie Hobbs. Genetic researchers, COVID-19 virus is mutating slowly. Reinfections possible. More Arizonans were uninsured last year, report says. The pandemic crushed South Phoenix business. Then light rail construction started. After all that at AZ Central, you get, will Joe Biden visit Arizona? Truck clubs celebrate Mexican Independence Day. That's much more important, of course, isn't it, than the shooting of a federal officer. Mike Pence and Karen Pence to visit Phoenix. Self-storage continues to trend. That's important to know, too. Bad news again for Martha McSally. That was a headline. Then under local news, because none of that was local, they have a section for local news, as if the previous headlines weren't. Controversial waste station won't come to Peoria. You may think the shooting of a federal officer in downtown Phoenix more important than that. How about this one? Risk of shortages grow along Colorado River. And then there was something about an Uber driver being charged from an incident in 2018. But what of yesterday? What of, in the midst of what seems like an open war on public safety, including riots, targeting of private property, civilians, and police, what of a federal officer shot in front of a federal courthouse in Phoenix yesterday? The very kind of thing our president and attorney general sent federal agents into Portland about a month ago when the federal courthouse there was under attack. And here we have a downed local federal officer. Not a word. I suppose the Arizona Republic just took their cues from the Democratic Convention. If you don't mention the problem, the violence, the mayhem, it doesn't exist. We can keep the people dumb, uninformed, especially when the story is not helpful to the cause. I put the cause in quotes. As the Duke of Gloucester said in Richard III, say that I slew them not. And as the Queen replies, then say they are not slain, but dead they are, and devilish slave by thee. I was reading the story from Professor Gary Morrison about early 20th century Russia, where there were waves of unprecedented terror attacks against the state. He writes, quote, anyone wearing a uniform was a candidate for a bullet to the head or sulfuric acid to the face. Country estates were burnt down, and businesses were extorted or blown up. Bombs were tossed at random into railroad carriages, restaurants, and theaters. Far from regretting the death and maiming of innocent bystanders, terrorists boasted of killing as many as possible, either because the victims were likely bourgeois or because any murder helped bring down the old order. Close quote. Sounds like Compton on Saturday, and the hospital the sheriff's deputies were brought to. Sounds like Portland. Sounds like Seattle. Sounds like Kenosha. Sounds like Chicago, Baltimore, Rochester, Atlanta. Then, Professor Morrison wrote this, quote, how did educated liberal society respond to such terrorism in Russia? What was the position of the Constitutional Democratic, the Cadet Party, and its deputies in the Parliament, the Duma, in 1905? Though cadets advocated democratic constitutional procedures and did not themselves engage in terrorism, they aided the terrorists in any other way they could. Cadets collected money for terrorists, turned their homes into safe houses, and called for total amnesty for arrested terrorists who pledged to continue the mayhem. Cadet Party Central Committee member N.N. Shepkin declared that the party did not regard terrorists as criminals at all, but as saints and martyrs. The official cadet paper, Herald of the Party People's Freedom, never published an article condemning political assassination. The party leader, Paul Milyukov, declared, quote, "All means are now legitimate, and all means should be tried." When asked to condemn terrorism, another liberal leader in the Duma, Ivan Petrushkevich, replied, condemn terror. That would be the moral death of the party. If any of this sounds familiar, maybe you'd think leading Democrats here would raise money for the rioters, help bail them out. Maybe the elites would donate to their causes and defense via GoFundMe pages. Maybe they would select a presidential candidate who, like Chance Gardner in Being There, is of such diminished capacity that he merely mouths what is easily fed to him and is kept under wraps as much as possible, lest he go off script or reveal his incapacity. Maybe their vice presidential candidate would say the rioting isn't going to let up and should not, and that we should not. Maybe she'd visit alleged criminals and call them heroic. Maybe she'd say she's proud of them. Maybe their main house organs, be it newspapers or televised news, would ignore the violence and hide or bury the unpleasant, the sadistic elements of them. When asked to comment them, they might even call them myths. The inconvenient facts that upset their narratives can simply be made to go away. Just like inconvenient truth-tellers were sent away once the powers of the Constitutional Democratic Party, funded and covered for, attained power. Perhaps we might look at today's cancel culture and censorship as the transitory phase Marx thought socialism was on the way to communism. Heck, maybe we might even label or libel truth-tellers as beneath dignity, beneath humanity, beneath sanity. Maybe we'd call their leaders psychiatrically unfit or unstable. Deplorable might be a word. Racist might be another. Stephen Spender, writing in The God That Failed, wrote, quote, "I had discovered that these people did not consider that they were in any way answerable for the actions of the cause which they supported. I began to wonder how much communists know about communism. I still wonder. Other communists do not say to them, 'We have slave camps in Russia.' Quite the contrary. If a fellow communist even suggested this, he would be accused of occupying himself with unimportant details, if not being accused of being a fascist. It might even go beyond politics. Maybe it would move into our entertainment. Maybe it would take hold in sports. Maybe a general manager of a major team, even in a red state like Texas, might tweet the blandest of support for people in Asia, like Hong Kong, who themselves are marching to protest communism, and then be reprimanded and ostracized to the point where he'd have to apologize. Maybe a saint from New Orleans would be reprimanded and ostracized to the point where he'd have to apologize for voicing an opinion supporting what 100% of Americans did all the time in standing for our national anthem up until about a year ago, saying that was his idea of unity. Maybe he'd be forced to say calling the national anthem a moment of unity was insensitive. And maybe all the people forcing these confessions, these professions of faith, would stay silent and happily take money from a country that relies on slave labor, all while proclaiming itself, as Mao Zedong's book in Chapter 1 states, the Chinese Communist Party is the core of the Chinese Revolution, and its principles are based on Marxism, Leninism. All while proclaiming slavery here, having ended 155 years ago, is the bigger problem, or rather the only problem we should focus on, much bigger than the slavery going on there right now and that they're making money off of. Maybe the people forcing these confessions understand better than we do the notion of Marxist historiography, the need to change history, and they would do so in a manner George Orwell worried about, writing, "Do you realize that the past, starting from yesterday, has been actually abolished? Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book has been rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. And that process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. with history having stopped and nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. An endless present in which the party is always right. The past, starting with yesterday, perhaps including the shooting of a federal officer in downtown Phoenix, is abolished. Didn't happen. Doesn't exist. Maybe, too, as with any revolutionary movement, you would proclaim support for some races and diminish, even erase the history of, when not erasing the humanity of, other peoples. You'd most assuredly always have anti-Semitism, tolerate it, coddle it, perhaps even support it. You'd make people ignorant of it, too. You'd create a movement that made people ignorant of all the crimes against humanity and civilization abuse, whose very ideologies you are trying to adopt and get others to support. And you'd start in the schools. Heck, to quote Paul Harvey, you might just create a media that, with promises of higher ratings, mesmerizes and fans flames rather than reports. But only stories that support the cause and the party. Not with what you should know or even what you may want to know, but what the cause and the party thinks you should know and wants you to know. For soon enough, with enough success, what you should know and what you would want to know will be manipulated until it is changed to exclusively what the cause and the party want you to know. All this, is what we are to decide upon and either sanction or redress about 48 days from now. Who knew it would come to all this? Only those that know the power of socialism. That includes not just us, but them. Perhaps it includes them in their knowledge of what they are doing even more than we. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.